Or this slide's not sharing, David. Great. And if you could go back one slide, David. So it looks like we're pretty close to critical mass, and I think we can get going. Welcome, everyone. You've come to the IRP Modeling Advisory Group webinar on draft inputs and assumptions for the 2022-2023 IRP cycle. My name is Nathan Barcic, Program and Project Supervisor for Integrated Resource Planning at CPUC Energy Division's IRP. We're going to go over some quick logistics and scope on slide 3 that some of you may be familiar with from previous webinars, but we always like to be clear up front. So first, the webinar slides that we're about to go through are voluminous. For those that have already gotten the chance to take a look, they're available on the webpage noted here in the first bullet. An email from our project manager on this, Eshraghi, went out last night noting the same. The workshop is being recorded. We have 4 main objectives this morning. First is to provide you an overview of the 2023 draft inputs and assumptions document for IRP. Second is to highlight some specific topics from that document, generally focusing on new or complex material and or where there may still be something approaching an open question. Third would be to discuss overall process and timeline for finalizing that document. And fourth would be to request and make clear how to provide informal feedback from stakeholders that are interested on commenting on some of the things that we're about to present. The next slide, we have a little bit of housekeeping. We strongly invite clarifying questions throughout the webinar. I'll plug here my usual request back to participants to limit your input to clarifying questions and to not drift into advocacy for the sake of this webinar. We very much want to hear your opinions and comments, but today is all about making sure that people understand the material, which is complex and detailed, and we only have 3 hours. So we thank you in advance for honoring that. The main method for submitting questions is through the Q&A function in the bottom right-hand side of the WebEx screen. You can look to see a button that has 3 dots on it. You can click on it and see Q&A. Please do not use the chat function that is near it. Please use the button with the 3 dots and use Q&A. Use of the Q&A function really helps from our side, and we think from the stakeholder side too. For us, it helps us more efficiently address stakeholder questions with the benefit of a written record that we can post later. If for some reason the Q&A function doesn't work for you, we'll try to have a few junctures at which one of these backups can be used. First, if you're within WebEx, you can use the raise your hand function and we'll try to find you. Second, if you're phone only, you can dial *3 to raise your hand and we should be able to see it. The recording from this webinar and the Q&A transcript will be posted on our website next to where these slides are already posted. We request informal comments back in 2 weeks. Informal in this case means not in the IRP proceeding record, but still meant to inform staff in its attempts to refine the INA to get the inputs and assumptions as tight as possible. The next 2 slides contain a pretty detailed agenda. There are a lot of topics, and that's a lot of subject matter experts from our side that are going to be presenting and here for Q&A. For the presenters from the PUC, we have myself, Eshraghi, Patrick Young, Jared Ferguson, and Neil Raffan. And from Energy Division's consultants in IRP, including those from E3, Astrapé, and Montara Mountain Energy, we have Sam Schreiber, Michaela, Levine, Roderick Go, Sumin, Wang, Angineh, Zohrabian, Femi, Sawyerr, Josh Spooner, and Charlie Gulian. Also on the panel with us are some others from Energy Division, David Miller, David Withrow, and Lauren Reiser. And from our consulting team, Jimmy Nelson, Christa Heavey, Emily Leslie, Kevin Carden, and Trevor Bellon. The agenda you see here roughly corresponds to the sequence of things that you'll see in the INA document itself. David, if you could go to the next slide, you can see basically what we're looking at for the next 3 hours. We're very much looking forward to presenting this and interacting with you. And with that, I'll hand over to Ali for some context, process, and timing detail.
Thank you, Nathan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Eshraghi, Senior Analyst, IRP, and let's go through context, process, and timing of the INA document for this IRP cycle. The INA document is a reference document that we use for IRP modeling within a given cycle. This document describes key data elements, assumptions, and methodologies. So basically, it's a reference book in IRP for all the modeling and portfolio development that we do in a given cycle. The INA document for the 2022-23 IRP cycle, which we call it 2023 INA, and the supporting materials, as Nathan mentioned, are now available at IRP webpage. This is the reference document that we use for developing a 2023 Preferred System Plan, PSP, and 2024-25 Transmission Planning Process, TPP portfolios. Next slide. Thanks. This document, the 2023 INA document, has 8 sections. Section 1, Introduction, provides an overview of the result and several models and key data and model updates. I just note that the previous version of this document, 2019 INA, was very result-centric. In this version, we have included more serum content, which is important to have a comprehensive document that describes all the information we use in IRP modelings, both in resolve and serum. Section 2, load forecast. Section 3, baseline resources, existing resources or resources in development to be operational in the IRP modeling years. Section 4, resource cost methodology, which is financial model used to calculate the levelized fixed costs of candidate resources. Next slide, please. Optimize resources is section 5, which discusses cost assumptions used to characterize the potential new resources. Section 6, generators operating assumptions. Section 7, resource adequacy requirements. And finally, section 8, greenhouse gas emissions and renewable portfolio standards, RPS. Next slide. There are a lot of ways to categorize the INA documents content. One way is to put them into 2 categories that you can see on this slide. First category, the updates compared to the last cycle. These are updates of inputs and assumptions as more recent data vintages are available. Examples are load forecast, resource cost updates, and others that you can see under bullet 1 here. Second category, the new items that we are introducing as part of this INA document in this cycle. IRA, emerging technologies, VGI, and reliability modeling are among those. Next slide. In terms of the process and timing for developing the 2023 INA document, we had a modeling advisory group last September, got the stakeholders' comments on the topics that were presented. We just released a draft 2023 INA document and holding this webinar. Stakeholders have 2 weeks from today to submit their informal comments to staff, and we will finalize the document incorporating the comments we will receive by late Q3 in time for PSV and TPP portfolios development for this IRP cycle. Next slide. Just a few points on the instruction and process for submitting your comments. You have 2 weeks from today to submit your comments to staff. So please submit your comments by June 21st. Probably most of you are familiar with this email box, the IRP email, data request email box. Please send your comments as a single PDF document to irpdatarequest@cpuc.ca.gov. Although not required, but we encourage stakeholders to include the IRP service list as well, basically to send the comments to the whole IRP service list. As Nathan noted, please categorize your comments based on sections and topics in the draft 2023 INA document. And finally, please support your input with data and explanations. And if you are referring to a specific data, please provide the links to those data. With that, we can move on to the resources and cost assumptions, and I pass it to Sam to kick off that section.
Thank you, Ali, and good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Schreiber. I'm a consultant with E3. You go to the next slide. So we'll begin things with the discussion on the resource baseline. So to start, I want to provide some definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. The resource baseline includes both online and in development resources, and this is an input to both the Resolve and SERVM models. Online resources are defined to be resources that are already built and operating, net of any expected retirements. Resources in development are resources that have approved contracts or resources already under construction that have made significant progress towards an expected online date. So this resource baseline includes all existing and all in development resources, but it does not include candidate resources. Those resources are the ones that can be selected by the model as new resource additions. Additionally, the resource baseline does not include any generic planned new resources as reported in the LSE filings. These instead are interpreted as minimum build thresholds for the corresponding candidate resource. So quickly, the sources of data for the resource baseline. For online resources within CAISO, we use the CAISO master file as well as the CAISO master generating capability list. We use the CAISO mothball retirement list for resource retirement dates. For other non-CAISO LSEs, we use the POU filings processed by the CEC for both online and in development resources. For in development resources within the CAISO, we refer to the LSE IRP filings. And then for resources outside of California, we refer to the WEC Anchor Dataset or ADS. Next slide, please. So on the next 3 slides, we've prepared some visuals showcasing what the current resource baseline is as of 2025. This year was selected just as a good baseline for when most of the in development resources are online. So the data source for the CAISO baseline comes from the CAISO master file as well as the November LSE filings. The CAISO baseline resource portfolio totals 78.4 gigawatts of installed capacity. Of this includes 28.5 gigawatts of thermal gas units, 8.1 gigawatts of onshore wind, 19 gigawatts of solar, and 9.1 gigawatts of lithium-ion batteries. For a more detailed breakdown of the CAISO installed capacity by modeling year, you can refer to section 3 of the INA. Additionally, all of the data presented in this slide and the following slides is available in the intermediate processed workbooks accompanying this presentation, including the resource cost and build workbook. Next slide, please. These 3 entities listed in the chart on the left are the non-CAISO LSEs that are modeled in Resolve, and the baseline resource portfolio by zone in 2025 is shown. The data for bank, IID, and LIDWP are sourced from the POU filings as processed by the CEC, and the gigawatt totals are shown 5.1 in bank, 2.2 gigawatts in IID, and 10.9 gigawatts in LIDWP. And again, for a more detailed breakdown, please refer to the supporting documents. Next slide, please. Finally, the 2 external zones that are modeled are the Northwest and Southwest. The baseline resource totals for these zones are sourced from the WEC Anchor Dataset. The Northwest totals is 42.9 gigawatts, and the Southwest is 44.3 gigawatts. We move to the next slide. So 2 additional topics regarding the baseline resource that we want to talk about. The first concerns the retention of aging thermal units. So in the chart on the right, we show the current online existing CAISO gas capacity. In addition to the 28.5 gigawatts from the previous slide, we also see an additional 3 or 4 gigawatts of OTC steam turbines that are currently online. So I know that there's been some movement in the past week on the expected retirement dates of the OTC steam turbines. The current assumption is that these would retire by 2025, but that assumption is subject to review based on the ongoing proceedings. Additionally, the combined heat and power units are assumed to retire over 2031 to 2040 on a linear step down. So when you take those two technologies off of the chart, you're left with remaining 25 gigawatts of thermal capacity. Those CCGT, peaker, and reciprocating engines are subject to economic retention decisions in Resolve. So notes on this: Resolve considers reliability needs and fixed O&M costs to determine whether it is cost-effective to retain or to retain a thermal generator. Of those 25 gigawatts, 19 of this gas-fired capacity is assumed to serve local capacity requirements in local areas. Of that 19, 4 gigawatts can be replaced with local 4-hour lithium-ion batteries, but the remaining 15 must be retained. So in the chart on the right, you see that there's a 15 gigawatt floor, essentially, of aging thermal units that cannot be that must be retained, rather. And the balance is subject to economic retention decisions. The decision is whether to retain the gas units on the CAISO system, but not to retire. The generators can still serve non-CAISO load. Next slide. A final update to the baseline resource modeling and Resolve concerns the hydro resources. In previous IRP cycles, the hydro generators in CAISO were categorized into small hydro, which is primarily run-of-river units, and large hydro resources. In addition to different operating characteristics for these two generator types, the additional assumption was that all in-state hydro resources will provide resource adequacy and GHG-free energy to CAISO, but only the small hydro units are capable of providing RECs. In this cycle in Resolve, these generators have been now combined into a single CAISO hydro resource, with an energy budget and REC production determined by the historical energy production of these generators. Additionally, firm hydro imports from the Northwest provide GHG-free energy to CAISO. 8.31% of the Northwest hydro resource, as determined by gigawatt-hour totals from historical asset controller supplier imports, is earmarked as Northwest hydro for CAISO for this purpose. So going through the table at the bottom, we have the CAISO hydro resource with an average historical annual production as shown there. Of those gigawatt hours, 11.35% is assumed to come from small hydro and is therefore RPS eligible. And then all of the CAISO hydro capacity energy is assumed to be GHG free and providing resource adequacy. For the Northwest hydro for CAISO resource, that resource is not RPS eligible and does not provide resource adequacy, but those gigawatt hours do provide GHG free energy. Next slide. All right, so I'll turn this back over to you, Ali.
Thank you, Sam. Next slide. Let's talk about different types of resource additions in IRP modeling, optimized versus non-optimized. Optimized resources represent the menu of new resource options from which Resolve can select to create an optimal portfolio. On the other hand, we have non-optimized resources. These resources are modeled in Resolve, but have prescribed adoption over time and are not represented as decision variables in the optimization model. Energy efficiency, behind emitter solar, and storage are non-optimized resources. Back to the optimized resources, they are in two categories. Default candidate resources that are included in the IRP core portfolios. These are established, commercially viable resource technologies such as solar, wind, geothermal, and other resources and other examples that you can see on this slide. And then we have non-default candidate resources. These are more experimental and the resources that are not yet commercially mature, such as shift demand response, emerging technologies, and VGI. IRP studies these resources in sensitivity cases as part of the portfolio development. Next slide. The 2023 INA document defines guiding principles for a resource to become a default candidate resource in IRP modeling. During each IRP portfolio development, staff evaluates the non-default candidate resources based on these guiding principles and determines if a resource meets the criteria to be a default candidate resource. The resource should be viable, meaning it is a commercialized technology. The resource should be scalable and could be selected at sufficient volume to meaningfully impact the state's electric portfolio. Also, the resource should be cost competitive within the time frame of IRP analysis with sufficient publicly available market data to validate those projections. It should be actionable, meaning that mechanisms exist or could be reasonably expected to be put in place to enable the CPUC to guide procurement of this resource. And finally, the resource can reasonably be expected to come online within the time frame of IRP analysis. Next slide. As we got questions on different solar photovoltaic resources in the IRP modeling, the 2023 INA document attempts to better clarify this. We have 3 solar photovoltaic resources in IRP, 2 optimized and 1 non-optimized. The two optimized ones are represented as either utility scale or distributed. These 2 differ in cost, transmission, and performance assumptions. The non-optimized one is customer PV or behind-the-meter PV that has prescribed adoption over time from IPER forecast, and it is an input into IRP modeling. With that, I pass it back to Sam for the rest of this section.
Thank you, Ali. So before jumping into the resource costs discussion, I want to note briefly a decision that we're considering on the modeling of hybrid paired solar storage as a candidate resource in Resolve. At the previous webinar in September 2022, staff sought stakeholder feedback on the modeling of hybrid solar and storage resources for the INA. Since then, we've done some more research and understanding of the Inflation Reduction Act. Under the new scheme, standalone energy storage resources can now receive investment tax credits without any constraints on charging or co-location with renewable generation. So given these updates, staff does not believe that hybrid storage resources need to be modeled in this IRP cycle, but we welcome feedback from stakeholders on this change. Next slide. So before diving into the content on this slide, I just want to note that this section will be discussing the resource cost updates since the previous webinar. This section concerns default candidate resources in Resolve. The emerging technology resource costs will be discussed in a later section. So firstly, let's run through these updates since the September 22 MAG webinar. The first major update was to incorporate the Inflation Reduction Act. The changes are noted here. Extensions of existing tax incentives to all zero carbon technologies through 2048. IRA bonus incentives are assumed for all technologies where applicable. Production tax credit or PTC is available to candidate solar resources and assumed to be selected in lieu of the investment tax credit or ITC. The ITC is now available to all storage technologies, including lithium-ion batteries, pumped hydro, and emerging technologies that involve storage. And there is a new PTC credit available for CCS, direct air capture, and hydrogen production. And that will be discussed more in the emerging tech section. In addition to incorporating the IRA, staff did some research on additional cost modifications for certain technologies. These technologies, solar PV, onshore wind, and lithium-ion batteries, have been disproportionately affected by commodity price increases in recent years due to supply chain disruptions and surging demand. These cost modifications will be discussed in later slides. Additionally, the data source for lithium-ion batteries has been updated to NREL 2022 ATB. And these modifications to the overnight capital cost trajectories for all of these technologies either slow or delay the cost decline over time. So first, let's do a quick recap on the IRA and the changes it brings to tax credits for zero emission technologies. The solar can now choose to receive either an investment tax credit or a production tax credit. And the PTC is assumed for utility scale solar due to superior project economics, a comparison of which is provided in Appendix B. Standalone storage is eligible to receive the ITC. Wind can continue to receive a PTC, but at a higher rate per the IRA. Offshore wind can access the IRA ITC, which is technology neutral. And for all of these IRA-related ITCs and PTCs, we are assuming the bonus case. The bonus ITC assumes that projects meet certain prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, and these are required to receive the full 30% ITC or $26 per megawatt hour PTC. In addition to the bonus IRA, there are additional adders that exist if certain criteria are met for either domestic content requirements or energy community siting. These adders are provided for viewing in Appendix B, but they are not modeled as default assumptions in the IRP due to the regional specificity of those assumptions. So quickly, the charts on the, if you don't mind, I just want to talk through those charts very quickly. So the solid black line on the right shows the new incentives under the IRA. And a quick note on the assumed tail end of these charts. So under the IRA, the tax credits are scheduled to expire at the later of 2032 and the year in which the United States achieves a 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions relative to 2022 levels. The assumption being made in the IRP and shown on these charts is that we hit this target in 2045. So beginning in 2045, we have a 3-year step down of incentives with a final expiration year in 2048. Okay, next slide, please. So on this chart, we have shown the total levelized fixed cost by vintage for some key candidate resource technologies. And these charts have now been updated to reflect the IRA tax incentives. Some notes here. The data source for resource costs is the 2022 NREL ATB for all technologies, including now lithium-ion batteries, but excluding offshore wind, which continues to use the location-specific 2020 NREL cost of floating offshore wind report. The total levelized fixed costs shown here represent the cost to construct new candidate resources and will impact build decisions in Resolve. These costs include overnight capital costs, construction financing costs, fixed O&M costs, and any capital-based tax credits. Relative to the September 2022 MAG, LFCs are reduced through 2045 for all zero carbon technologies that select the ITC, and this is due to the IRA. Next slide, please. To provide another visualization of this data, here we are plotting the levelized cost of energy by vintage, updated to reflect the IRA. An important disclaimer is that this LCOE data is indicative using boilerplate assumptions on capacity factor, and this does not get used in Resolve. The 75% reduction of power sector carbon emissions is not assumed to be reached until 2045, and for that reason, you see a slight increase in LCOEs between 2045 to 2048. Additionally, the geothermal resources now benefit from a 30% ITC, and they appear to be more cost competitive with offshore wind, at least in the near term. Next slide, please. So, in addition to the updates for the IRA, staff also considered some adjustments to resource capital costs due to high commodity prices. At the September 22 MAG, parties raised concerns about commodity prices and their potential impacts on resource costs. Recent data does suggest that utility scale solar, lithium-ion battery storage, and onshore wind overnight capital costs have been disproportionately impacted by current market conditions. These include continued supply chain disruptions following the COVID-19 pandemic, and also a sustained increase in demand for the materials required to construct these resources, principally among them being the minerals critical to the production of lithium-ion batteries. A full discussion of these impacts can be found in Appendix C of the slide deck. Staff proposes that modifications are made to the 2022 NREL ATB capital cost trajectories to respond to these concerns. And we'll discuss these in the next slides. First, a note on utility scale lithium-ion battery CapEx. In the previous MAG webinar, the cost trajectory presented for lithium-ion batteries used the Lazard LCOS version 7.0 as the starting point for that trajectory. Staff was waiting for the release of the next version of Lazard, which ultimately did come out in April 2023. But due to the delayed release of Lazard LCOE+, staff decided to update its cost assumption data source for lithium-ion batteries from Lazard to NREL ATB. The NREL ATB storage costs have historically been high relative to observed market prices, but with recent supply chain constraints, this gap has narrowed. The Lazard cost assumptions tend to be more optimistic on upfront capital costs, but this is partially compensated by a higher fixed O&M cost due to warranty extension, augmentation, and periodic replacement. So on the right, you see the comparisons in 2022 dollars between the three data sources. We are currently using NREL 2022 ATB as our starting point for the trajectory, but we welcome feedback on what other data sources ought to be considered. Next slide, please. So in addition to the update of data source from Lazard to NREL ATB, we believe it is prudent to modify the trajectory coming out of NREL to respond to these recent trends we're observing in prices. The first update was the initial value for the trajectory was set equal to the publicly reported value in 2022 from the ATB. This value is $1550 per kilowatt in 2022 dollars. This reflects the recent price shock due to sustained growth in demand promoted by new policies, supply chain issues, and coincident increases in commodity prices. The second modification was that this $1550 value is held constant on a flat trajectory through 2026. This is to allow several years for the commodity markets to adjust to sustained high demand for lithium-ion batteries. And then beginning in 2027, the trajectories return to the NREL cost curve, but just with a 4-year lag. Next slide, please. For solar, the modifications are slightly different. The initial values for the solar cost curves are indexed to the publicly reported values between 2020 and 2022 from the NREL ATB. In the mid case, this is $1,318 per kilowatt for the mid cost scenario. This reflects stagnation in the cost decline for solar development since 2021. This cost trajectory is assumed to remain flat through 2027 for many of the same reasons as lithium-ion batteries. We expect markets to require some time to adjust to demand increases in the amount of solar that's being brought online. And then beginning in 2028 for the mid trajectory, we assume a linear cost decline curve. Next slide, please. Finally, for onshore wind, the proposed modifications are a little bit simpler. We keep the same initial CapEx cost value reported from the NREL ATB. This is because that onshore wind construction costs have not been observed to suffer from recent price shocks as severely as the other technologies. However, we do assume going through 2030 that the rate of cost decline is reduced by half. And this is to allow markets to adjust to sustained high demand as well. Beginning in 2030, the trajectories resume to match the NREL ATB. So putting this all together on this slide, we have the total levelized fixed cost by technology, incorporating both the IRA, excuse me, and the proposed capital cost modifications for batteries, solar, and wind. These LFCs would be the final cost inputs into Resolve for candidate resources and impact resource build decisions. The modifications to lithium-ion battery capital cost would make this technology's LFC higher than pumped hydro storage throughout the planning horizon. So that's an important note. And staff welcomes feedback on these modifications proposed in this section from stakeholders. Finally, just for visualization, here is the LCOE, including these capital cost modifications. The only note here is that there are slight changes to solar and onshore wind LCOE, but it does not affect the stack very significantly. Next slide, please. Okay, I will turn it over to Michaela.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Michaela from E3, and I'll talk now about the demand response inputs and assumptions in the IRP. First, I'll define some terms to provide some background. Next, I'll talk about the modeling assumptions used in previous IRP cycles. Then I'll present the shed DR supply curve that will be used in the 2022-2023 cycle. Then I'll talk about how shift DR will be modeled and resolved in this cycle. And finally, I'll show the shift DR supply curve. The IRP focuses on two types of demand response, shed and shift DR. Shed demand response is provided by loads that can be curtailed to provide capacity. The chart on the left shows a load providing shed demand response from hours 16 to 20. The shaded area shows the curtailed load, and the green arrow illustrates the provided capacity. Shift demand response is provided by loads that can move demand to different hours. The chart on the right shows that the customer's baseline load is typically highest between hours 16 and 20, but the customer is able to shift much of that load to earlier in the day. LBNL has been supporting the CPUC and assessing demand response potential in California. Through that work, LBNL has created detailed load profiles and supply curves for both of these demand response resources. In the 2017-2018 and the 2019 to 2021 IRP cycles, data from phase 2 of LBNL's California Demand Response Potential Study was used in the IRP. In the 2022-2023 IRP cycle, data from phase 4 of that study will be used. In the 2019-2021 cycle, shed DR was considered as a candidate resource that Resolve could select, but in that cycle, shift DR was not analyzed. Since then, with the advisement of LBNL, the Resolve code has been updated to be able to more accurately model shift DR. In the 2022-2023 cycle, shift DR will be made available as a candidate resource in sensitivity analyses. Next slide, please. In 2035, the IRP will model 1.7 gigawatts of baseline shed DR, which is lower than the 2.2 gigawatts of baseline DR that was modeled in the previous cycle. We remove baseline DR from the lowest cost price tranches of LBNL supply curve to identify the remaining supply of candidate DR for the model to choose from. In the 2022-2023 IRP cycle, we remove existing interruptible pumping loads from the agricultural pumping portion of LBNL supply curve, and we model the rest of existing DR coming from other end uses. LBNL models EVs in their supply curve, but DGI will be considered in other analyses or work streams that will be discussed later in this workshop. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the data inputs provided by LBNL needed to model shift DR and resolve. There are hourly constraints on the percentage of a resource capacity that can be shifted up, or an increase in load, or shifted down, a decrease in load. Daily energy budgets constrain the amount of energy that can be shifted during the day. In the chart in the top right, we're seeing that this technology's energy budget prevents the technology from doing a large load shift in both the morning and evening. It can only do one or the other. Adjacency is the maximum number of hours that can occur between a shift down in load and a shift up in load. And finally, daily energy neutrality ensures that a shift down in load is accompanied by a shift up in load. Next slide, please. This slide is showing an illustrative dispatch of HVAC shift DR by resolve. The two tables are heat maps where the rows are hours of the day and the columns are sample days. The top table is showing hours where HVAC load is increased, which occurs in the middle of the day to absorb excess solar. And the bottom chart shows hours where load is decreased, and we see that load is decreased in the morning and evening ramping hours. Next slide, please. This chart shows the cumulative average daily shiftable load in 2035 in the supply curve. The supply curve consists of many technology types that have varying hourly shift up and shift down limits. The selected resource portfolios from Resolve will present the aggregated amount of shift DR selected by the model. Shiftable load from LDPs will be considered in the VGI workstream, as I noted, which will be discussed later. And medium heavy duty EV load shifting will not be considered in this IRP analysis. That's all we have on the shift and shed DR, and I'll hand it back to Ollie.
Thank you. So pass it back to Roderick.
Yep. Thanks, Ali. I'm Roderick from E3, and I'll be talking about the emerging technologies and zero carbon technologies that we'll be including in this IRP cycle. So last year, E3 performed a technology review of long duration storage and other zero carbon generation technologies that we considered to be emerging. These technologies would be added in sensitivities to enable potentially lower cost zero carbon grids towards the 2045 goals. You can see here there's a link to the report on the CPUC website. In general, the assessment attempted to identify emerging technologies that were relatively high on the technology readiness level, and we have a slide later that will review some of that information, with the idea that we wanted to pick emerging technologies that we felt staff felt were relatively mature and had a higher likelihood of being able to be deployed at scale by the second half of the 2030s. Given the sort of range of technologies that are out there, the technologies that we are representing do not cover every technology and is not exhaustive, but we hope that it helps demonstrate the value of these emerging technologies in the portfolio. If we go to the next slide, this slide summarizes the general overview of the technologies that we will be considering in this cycle. There are a couple zero carbon generation technologies that we'll be including. Two carbon capture and storage technologies. One is gas with post-combustion CCS, which has an approximately 99% capture rate. An alum cycle CCS, which has a closer to 100% capture rate. And then additional zero carbon generation technologies include advanced nuclear and enhanced geothermal. And you can find the assumptions in the INA documents. In terms of emerging storage technologies, we are looking at two categories of longer multi-day or seasonal storage type technologies, including zero carbon electrolytic fuels. For the purposes of this cycle, we are focusing on hydrogen from electrolysis and steam methane reformation, and direct air capture as the main electrolytic fuel. That fuel would be in turn used to fuel hydrogen burning combustion turbines and combined cycle plants that would be available in the later past 20-30 years. In terms of multi-day storage, we are considering two long-duration storage technologies: adiabatic compressed air energy storage and iron air batteries, which represent durations up to approximately 100 hours for storage. We go to the next slide. This slide will mirror a lot of the characteristics that Sam discussed for the default technologies. So given the technology review that we performed, we're producing resolve type inputs, including estimated capital costs and financing trajectories through 2050, representative technology operational characteristics like round-trip efficiency, ramping constraints, heat rates as they apply to the specific technologies. And in terms of sort of additional considerations in terms of planning and policy and qualitative assessments of infrastructure need, that will be included in the analysis. If we go to the next slide, finally, this summarizes our overview of the technology readiness levels of different technologies, and I think we would be open to stakeholder feedback here. This is the set of technologies that we will be considering, and you can see the technology readiness level and estimated global deployment that we found for the various technologies. So with that, I will hand it over to Sam again to talk about resource cost assumptions for the IRP cycle for these technologies.
Cool, thanks, Roderick. So firstly, I want to discuss the impacts on emerging technology resource costs due to the IRA. So under the IRA, sections 45Q and 45V introduce a new PTC that are available to energy projects that either sequester carbon oxides or produce clean hydrogen. So the 45Q tax incentive makes credits available for the first 12 years of project operations for projects that sequester carbon oxides. And the 45V or hydrogen PTC provides credits available for the first 10 years of project lifetime for projects that produce hydrogen, provided that the emissions factor of that facility is less than 0.45 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilogram of hydrogen produced. So the assumptions that are being used in the IRP for CCS, we assume $85 per ton of carbon sequestered. For direct air capture, for synthetic natural gas production, we use $130 per ton of carbon captured, and that's the use case for use as a feedstock. And then hydrogen, the PTC is $3 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. Some notes here, for facilities to receive these PTCs, they must begin construction no later than 2032. And the assumption that we are using here is that there's a 3-year construction window. So projects can come online as late as 2035 and still receive the incentive. So talking to the chart on the right very quickly, the first note is that this chart is for project years, it's not vintaged by COD. So this chart represents a project with a COD in 2035, being construction start date in 2032. So when that project comes online, it would receive 10 years of PTC for a hydrogen facility, and that $3 per kilogram translates with an assumed capacity factor to $76 per megawatt hour. So it's a very lucrative incentive. Next slide, please. So on this chart, we have the fixed cost of emerging generation technologies. On the left, for reference, we have gas CCGT, and then moving across, we have gas with CCS, alum cycle, which assumes roughly 100% carbon capture, nuclear small modular reactors, and enhanced geothermal systems. Select years are shown with low and high bounds on the cost trajectories. So all of these emerging generation technologies under consideration have higher costs than conventional CCGTs, but they provide low or zero carbon generation. Enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS, have the highest cost projections of the technologies analyzed. And this cost data includes extended tax credits under the IRA, which includes the 30% tech neutral ITC for nuclear and EGS, and an $85 per ton PTC for CCS. Next slide, please. Similarly, for the candidate emerging technologies, energy storage technologies, All of these emerging techs under consideration have higher costs than conventional lithium-ion batteries, but they provide firm, long-duration capacity. Long-duration energy storage and hydrogen may exhibit significant cost reductions under a low-cost scenario, but there is large uncertainty reflected by the large error bars in the graph on the right. The hydrogen costs shown here include new pipeline costs, as well as the cost of new aero combustion turbines and underground storage. The synthetic natural gas costs include underground storage and a new CT, plus carbon neutral methane generating equipment. And finally, the cost data shown here include the extended tax credits under the IRA. This includes a 30% ITC for energy storage, which includes the fuel reservoir for hydrogen or synthetic natural gas. This also includes the hydrogen PTC and $130 per ton PTC for DAC of feedstock carbon. Next slide. Cool. I'll turn it over to Sumin.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's workshop. My name is Sumin Wang. I'm a managing consultant at E3. Today's presentation is going to be a continuation of what we presented in the last MAG workshop, but this time we'll focus more on the actual inputs and assumptions. David, if you can go to the next slide. So to recap, vehicle grid integration refers to any method that optimizes plug-in EV interaction with the grid and provides net benefits to the ratepayers as defined in the decision. VGI is categorized into two main types in the IRP. The first type is what has been done in the IRP, which are load shifting that's already included in IPER forecasts as response to time of use rates reflected in the EV load shape. But what's new in this IMA is that we are introducing EV load shifting beyond the IPER forecast. It can be in a form with direct management or in response to dynamic price signals, and also have the vehicles capable to discharge back to the grid. We call these as active VGI in the previous sessions, and we model them as resources in the IRP for this cycle. So these newly added VGI resources for this cycle will only focus on light-duty vehicles as they represent the majority of the load in California. And also they are modeled as statewide aggregated resource with four major types. They are V1G and V2G for both residential and workplace. V1G refers to EV load shifting beyond time of use rates, and the V2G will have also load shifting, but also have vehicles capable to discharge back to the grid. David, you can go to the next slide. So we presented the goal of the VGI analysis last time. The key I want to re-emphasize here is that this analysis is really trying to design to quantify the value of VGI, especially these various V1G and V2G actions that we modeled as resources in the context of system planning and look at their impact on the resource portfolio. The modeling approach chosen by this analysis does not indicate any CPUC endorsed program design for VGI. Next slide, please. So how do we model VGI as resources? So to start off, we need to set the baseline because that baseline tells us how much load you can further shift around. So the 2022 IPER load shapes are used as a baseline for the VGI analysis. But to model dynamic response, we also need to know how long people park at locations and how much load there is further we can shift. So to obtain those information, we actually need those data to shape the dispatch of VGI. Those data are actually not available from IPER. So E3 has to simulate the charging behaviors in our internal EV load shape tool to basically generate flexibility parameters that can be benchmarked with the 2030 IPER shape, which is about 80% managed to shape the dispatch of VGI in Resolve. In addition to that, we also need to develop supply curve, which basically tells us at what cost level, how much potential VGI is available. So for this IMA presentation, we will focus on the development of the supply curve. Next slide, please. To develop supply curve for these VGI in response to dynamic price signals, first we need to look at their technical potential. We first think about it from a percentage perspective. So imagine you start off from the 100% total LDV population. Not all drivers are actually all high-value VGI customers. Here, we assume only drivers with access to L2 chargers can provide high value to VGI as they have relatively longer park time and also higher charging capacity. And we assume about 42% of drivers will have access to L2 charger at home and 26% at work. In addition to that, not all drivers are actually willing to participate in such a program that requires active management. So to derive that willingness to participate, we estimate that using the propensity score curve from the latest LBNL Phase 4 study based on more recent DR program data. This is an update from the last September MAC workshop. So the gray dotted line here shown at the chart below are the original LBNL propensity score curve for both residential and commercial enrollment that tells you at what incentive level offer how many percentage of customer you can enroll. Ideally, we want to obtain that data from the actual VGI programs, but due to data confidentiality reasons, we couldn't obtain any of those data directly from the stakeholders. So we actually just directly used the LBNL curve, but we did make some adjustment to more reflect VGI participation. One major adjustment we did is that we actually shifted enrollment curve starting point to upward by 20% to basically assume that at zero cost level, you can actually get relatively high VGI participation than the traditional DR program, given that VGI program usually designed to be less interrupted than DR programs. And this 20% starting line is based on the fact that currently there's already about 20% of customers participated in EVTOU programs without any incentive. And we assume these customers are most likely to also willing to participate in these type of active management program. We developed two enrollment curve for the residential enrollment. The blue line, which is the mid-enrollment curve, is just a simply upward shift of the original LBNL curve by 20%. We also developed a more aggressive scenario, which is the high enrollment curve in yellow, due to the high uncertainties on these VGI participation at this point. For the purpose of this presentation, we will only focus on the results from the mid-enrollment curve. So with those enrollment curve being available, you can model different tranches of VGI participation as resources and derive at what cost level how much incremental participation you can achieve. For V1G, we assume 4 cost tranche range from $0 to $50 per kilowatt year. For V2G, we assume a higher cost tranche from $50 to $100. The reason why we assume higher cost for V2G is that we get feedback from stakeholders that V2G programs usually cost more than V1G and also usually set at the price equivalent to like a DR payment, program payment. In addition to that, we also limited the V2G potential by a multiplier to bound the V2G potential in each year to be what we think more realistically can happen. Because even today, if you give customers a $50 per kilowatt year incentive, you wouldn't achieve economy-wide 20% enrollment from customers. And this is due to the fact that V2G technology are not being readily available for most vehicles, and also the market is not mature yet. So this multiplier, we assume, range grows from 0% in 2025 to 50% in 2050 linearly to bound the actual potential of V2G. So in summary, the percentage of V2G potential is a product of the percentage access to L2 charger multiplied by the enrollment potential at each cost level and multiplied by the multiplier if the resource is a V2G resource. Next slide, please. So after we got this potential in percentage, we translate them into technical potential in actual megawatt to be modeled. The formula to be used is laid below. We use percentage potential for each VGI resource multiplied by the total LDV adoption forecast, multiplied by charger to EV ratio, which is assumed to be 1 at residential and 1/27 at workplace, multiplied by charger capacity at 7 kilowatt. So using the 2022 IPO adoption forecast, which forecasted about 2 million vehicles by the end of 2024 and grow to 31 million by 2045, we translate that potential for VGI to be around 1 gigawatt of potential by the end of 2024 and grow to 34 gigawatt by 2045. One thing I do want to note here is that these potential are the nameplate charger potential. They're actually not the effective load shift potential. the effective load shift potential will be much smaller than the charger potential, and that's highly dependent on the utilization rate of the charger, which will be relatively low at a residential. So, and also I want to clarify, these are only technical potential we modeled it for Resolve to select. They're actually not the final economic potential. Resolve will actually model these resources and determine how much VGI is actually cost effective to the grid. Lastly, if you can go to the next slide, we just want to briefly cover the costs. So for the costs we included in the supply curve, we include the fixed O&M costs that reflect the cost of incentivizing participation in these type of program with active management. They're comprised of administration costs, marketing costs, and incentive costs. The majority of the costs are the incentive costs that I talked about before. I want to note that these incentives are not CPUC endorsed or approved incentives, nor do they reflect utility payment for VGI to VGI customer as a subsidy. These are mainly costs we modeled it to see how, at what cost level VGI is cost effective to the grid. We also included the variable O&M costs that reflect the battery degradation impact of cycling V2G resources. The reason why we model them is because we don't want Resolve to cycle these resources way too frequent, more than what can be achieved realistically by customers. So a lot more details, including the VGI analysis assumptions, are in the intermediate data workbook, the appendix attached with this presentation, and also the IMA document. So welcome to review, and we appreciate feedback from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumin. So pass it to Jared.
Thanks, Ali. I'm Jared Ferguson. I'm an analyst with the IRP team, and I'm going to dive into a brief overview of the development of the resource potential values for the renewable generation resources. Next slide. The high-level resource potentials utilized in Resolve are developed by applying a series of screens to filter out areas not suitable to be developed. The process begins with an area-wide potential for onshore wind and solar using west-wide capacity factors derived from insolation and wind speed data. Then we screen out resource potential based on a series of techno-economic constraints, which represent areas where resources physically cannot be built, like in bodies of water or steep terrain, and areas of limited economic viability, such as low estimated capacity factors and candidate project areas that are too small. After the techno-economic screens, we then apply the land use and environmental screens, which include legally protected areas and the draft environmental and land use screens currently being finalized by the CEC. Next slide. The table here on the left are the techno-economic screening criteria that we are proposing to implement. These exclusions are centered on the physical and economic viability limitations based on the technological assumptions for the resources. These exclusions that you see here include steep slopes, limits around populated areas and other key infrastructure, as well as minimum capacity factors. These criteria have been adjusted over the last few months based on feedback we've received through the CEC's ongoing land use and environmental screens development process. The two maps here on the right show the remaining potential after the techno-economic exclusions have all been applied, and the black lines on these maps indicate the resource areas into which resource potentials are summed for capacity expansion modeling in Resolve. Next slide, please. The CEC over the past year has been working to develop statewide electricity sector planning screens for environmental and land use factors. The screens proposed by CEC staff incorporate the array of data sets listing here, including protected areas, a cropland index model developed by CEC staff, and then a series of biological planning priorities. For the resolve resource potentials, we are implementing the CEC's proposed core scenario screen, and the map here shows the remaining solar resource areas after this screen has been applied on top of the techno-economic screens. As I said, this core screen being applied is still the draft land use screen, and we plan to update the screens once the CEC has officially finalized the set of land use screens, and then we will be able to incorporate any changes that have been made for those final screens. Next slide. This slide compares the resource potentials for onshore wind under various minimum capacity factors. We have here between 20 and 30% for in-state wind, so the range of resource potential remaining after screens have been applied, and then we have a similar table for out-of-state wind resources. Staff are proposing to use a 28% minimum capacity threshold for the in-state wind, and then also the out-of-state, but in the Cal ISO wind. So that is the Southern Nevada and then the Baja California wind. We're proposing a 28% capacity factor, but using a series of higher capacity factor minimums for the other out-of-state resources. Staff are looking for stakeholder feedback on these proposed minimum thresholds. Next slide, please. And so this is a using the proposed thresholds for solar and wind. These tables show the resource potentials available in gigawatts for in-state solar, in-state onshore wind, and in-state geothermal. Next slide. This is a similar series of tables, but for the out-of-state resources. And it's important to note that the Southern Nevada and Arizona and Baja California wind resources are out of state, but are in the Cal ISO, so they are modeled within the transmission system, where the other resources are outside of the Cal ISO transmission system. Next slide. For offshore wind resource potential assumptions, staff are proposing continuing with the previously identified potential offshore wind areas, the two wind energy areas, Morro Bay and Humboldt, the two study areas or potential interest areas of Cape Mendocino and Del Norte, and excluding the now dormant Diablo Canyon call area. We have previously used a 3 megawatt per kilometer squared density factor assumption for our past modeling studies, and this was based off of the series of initial NREL studies. Staff are, for this updated INA, are considering the potential to utilize the higher 5 megawatt per kilometer squared density factor that more recent NREL work has pointed to as a more likely outcome. This is another data point where staff would appreciate stakeholder input on what assumptions to use, if we should use the high or the low, or another density factor. We would appreciate input, and particularly appreciate direction to studies or public data that would support the use of that density factor. Next slide, please. In previous resolve analysis, build limits were applied to solar resources in the near term, so over the next few future years, to constrain the model from overbuilding solar resources, as resolve would try to capture the expiring investment tax credit. Past analysis for the 2021 PSP and also the 2022 filing requirements utilized an 11 gigawatt through 2025 cap on solar. This limit was based on historical and LSE filings, as well as information from the CalISO interconnection queue. With the extension of the ITC, we are unlikely to see a rush to build solar due to a near-term expiring of that credit, and annual build limit should better reflect annual development that's feasible. Staff are proposing a 3,000 megawatt build limit for both solar and lithium-ion batteries annually through 2026, as you can see in this top right table. Apologies. Next slide, please. And this last table depicts the assumed first available online year for default candidate long lead time resources in Resolve. These assumptions are based on resource development timelines, and for some resources, like out-of-state wind in particular, the development times for associated new transmission were also factored in. And I believe that ends this section, Ali, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jared. So maybe before we move on to the next section, I'll ask the panelists if there is any questions that you want to answer verbally that you saw in the questions queue. Seems not. So let's move on to the next section, operating assumptions. And I hand it to Patrick.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Patrick Young with the Energy Division modeling team. The next subsection, we're going to talk about SERV-M, the reliability model that we use to support the IRP. In particular, we're going to talk about hourly load, solar generation, and wind generation profiles that were developed and used in SERV-M. Next slide, please. So as a reminder to the audience, SERV-M is a stochastic reliability model, and we rely on simulating realizations of study years thousands of times to capture a wide range of variability in possible outcome of weather and load and solar generation. And we get that variability from 23 weather years that we incorporate in the model to develop that variability. From these 23 weather years, currently 1998 through 2020, we have in the model. We use that to create normalized electric demand, solar radiation, and wind speed profiles in the model. The historical correlations in weather variables across time and space are preserved in the normalized demand and production profiles that we create for SERV-M. 21 and 22 data cannot be incorporated yet because we don't have the necessary demand data to yet incorporate the additional weather years from 2021 and 2022. But we hope that we can do that in the near future when the data becomes available. Next slide, please. So first, let's review how hourly load profiles are created in SERV-M. Let's see, we take the CAISO Energy Management System electric sales data and we back out behind the meter PV production and demand response events for the most recent years, 2018 through 2020, to reconstitute electric consumption. And that's important because that is the electric consumption is correlated directly with weather. And so that is the load that we want to train our regression model on. We use the most recent years to preserve recency bias. And we take that electric consumption demand that we get from derived from actual CAISO sales data, and we train a regression model with weather from corresponding to 2018 to 2020. Then we use that model with the trained parameters to build out a full 23 weather year set of synthetic hourly load profiles. Now, at this point, the load profiles are normalized, and then so depending on which study year we want to focus on in SURVEM, we need to scale up those load profiles to match whatever is the peak and annual energy forecast in the IPER demand forecasts. For non-CAISO regions, we follow a similar process, except we use FERC Form 714 data, and we use the WEC anchor data set to scale up to future peak and annual energy levels. Next slide, please. For the solar profiles, we use NREL's PV Watts version 5 calculator, and we train the data using 3 years of CAISO settlement data, along with the same 23 weather years of data from the National Solar Radiation Database. The profiles we create represent fixed tilt, single and double axis tracking, and behind the meter PV. And the inverter loading ratios that we assume are for utility scale solar 1.3 and behind the meter PV 1.13. We develop profiles to cover more than 24 locations across the WEC. Next slide. So for wind generation profiles, the wind speed data comes from the weather research and forecasting downscale model that was developed as part of the CEC's CalADAP program. Let's see, we can describe the wind model in 3 parts: wind state, in-state, out-of-state, and offshore. So for in-state, we use NREL's System Advisor Model Wind Toolkit. We take our wind speeds from we call it WRF for the weather, for short for Weather Research Forecasting Model. We train that on 3 recent years of CAISO settlement data. For out-of-state wind, we also use the NREL Wind Toolkit, but we rely on EIA data to train the model. For offshore wind, there is no real production data for training, so we worked with NREL to receive a response curve provided directly from them, and we pair that with wind speed data from the WRF model, and furthermore, we incorporated system losses into the wind output based on research that was prepared for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Now, all of these 23 weather years of hourly profiles has been and will continue to be the basis of hourly dispatch and modeling in SURVEM. In prior cycles, the hourly profiles that were used in Resolve were somewhat independently developed, and as part of the ongoing effort to improve our modeling, Resolve is now going to base its hourly profiles directly from the hourly profiles that are used in SURVEM. And I'm going to hand it over to Roderick to describe how they are doing that.
Thanks, Patrick. Patrick sort of said most of the information. As Patrick said, in this cycle, we'll be using the same weather data. So for all the loads, wind, solar profiles as SURVEM. So that includes 23 historical weather years of data. Resolve has historically used 37 representative days that represented 2007 to 9 historical weather years. In this cycle, we'll be updating that sampling using a meteoids-based clustering algorithm, which will try to find representative days that reduce the problem size for capacity expansion. In Resolve, the representative days are intended to capture, expected operational cost over the 23 weather years. And the clustering algorithm will be trained using gross load, net load, solar, wind, and hydro profiles to try to capture a representation of the entire distribution of the 23 years of data. As noted, in an effort to improve our modeling, we'll be providing all 23 years of weather data with the Resolve package so that we can continue to update those profiles as information comes to us. The other major change for Resolve's operational modeling is that the updated sampling algorithm allows us to capture some amount of chronological information between days. So in addition to an updated set of 23 weather years, the representative days will be linked across the years to enable better capturing of inter and multi-day energy shifting and long start resource starting dynamics that historically were not as well captured in Resolve. Yeah, so that's all we have for now, and we will update stakeholders in the future as this effort progresses. And I'll hand it back over to Ali.
Thank you. So let's move on to the next section, and Jared and Sam.
All right, thanks, Ali. Next slide, please. I will give a brief overview of the implementation of transmission assumptions in Resolve, and then I'll turn it over to Sam with E3 to walk through the updates in more detail. Next slide. The modeling of transmission constraints is centered on the CalISO's representation of the transmission system in its TPP work and the data provided by the ISO in its white paper on transmission capability estimates. The white paper shifted transmission from the nested zones described in the previous 2019 INA to a constraint-based model, which has been implemented since the 2021 PSP modeling. For key system level transmission constraints, the ISO provides data on existing transmission capability and potential upgrades, their incremental capability, their potential costs, and their estimated construction times. Data is provided for both full capacity deliverability, which the ISO derives from its on-peak assessments, and energy-only capacity, which is derived from the ISO's off-peak assessments. The white paper's corresponding constraint diagrams provide the geographic information necessary to associate candidate resources in Resolve with the appropriate transmission constraints. We are currently still implementing data from the CalISO's 2021 white paper, the last one released, but plan to incorporate the updated constraint information from the upcoming new white paper when it becomes available. Next slide, please. The transmission capability estimates included in the white paper were evaluated using nodal generation based on generators online by a certain date. Resources that have come online after that date or are in development or under construction were not, those resources are included in our Resolve baseline, but are not accounted for as utilizing transmission capability. Therefore, utilizing substation interconnection information of those resources, we calculate and subtract the estimated transmission capability utilized by these incremental baseline generators. Next slide, and I believe this is where I turn it over to Sam.
Thanks, Jared. So I want to spend some time discussing the role of build and dispatch constraints in Resolve. So the CAISO transmission capability estimates, as Jared introduced, are used to constrain the build out of resources in Resolve, but these constraints are not enforced in Resolve's dispatch algorithm. As an update this cycle to Resolve, to enable better representation of CAISO transmission constraints, in-state wind and solar candidate resources have been split into build resources, which obey transmission build constraints, and dispatch resources, which carry the operational requirements for dispatching and Resolve. The build resources allow for greater granularity than could be offered by the 10 to 15 regional resources that were modeled in previous cycles. These build resources will ensure that Resolve's resource builds fit within all of the CAISO-defined transmission constraints, and they more closely mimic the representation of the transmission system that is used in busbar mapping. For each candidate resource, build resources and their capacities are combined into dispatch resources that are used in Resolve dispatch algorithm. These dispatch resources align with the 10 to 15 regional resources from previous cycles. The dispatch resources avoid false precision around resource quality in localized areas, and they reduce the number of dispatch variables in Resolve's optimization to manage model runtime. So the next slide, I'll illustrate this point a little bit further. With the goal of modeling the transmission system with more fidelity, Resolve's representation of CAISO's transmission constraints has evolved to include more overlapping transmission limits that are simultaneously applied to resource buildouts. Depending on the point of interconnection, resource potential may be included under different sets of transmission constraints. So I want to spend a minute addressing the illustrative diagram below. Here we've drawn in various colors what are representing different transmission constraints on the CAISO system, and the nodes on this chart represent substations. In previous IRP cycles, for example, all of the substations within the Central Valley North Los Baños region were assumed to be a part of the same transmission constraints. In reality, the situation is more akin to this diagram, where you have some substations that are part of one constraint, some are part of two constraints, and some may be part of three or more constraints. So in this approach, we are now modeling the transmission constraints at a substation level and respecting the fact that some of these may be over or under constrained based on the actual diagrams. Next slide, please. So what we are doing now is taking the resource potentials that Jared discussed in the previous section from the land use analysis, and we are mapping them to substations from the CAISO constraint boundary diagrams. Those substations are then being grouped into clusters based on common memberships in transmission constraints. So for example, in the map shown on the right, we've highlighted the LA Basin area. In the LA Basin, there are three main constraints modeled by CAISO. Those are the Laguna Bell Mesa constraint, the SCE Metro constraint, and the Orange County area constraint. The substations are shown as the colored points on this map, and we've assigned those substations to clusters 3, 6, and 18 based on their memberships in these constraints. By aggregating these clusters together, we create three distinct build resources, which have the resource potentials of their constituent substations. Each transmission cluster represents a unique build variable in Resolve with its own resource potential and constraint memberships. Next slide, please. So as you are reviewing the intermediate workbooks and you see there are now many more variables than there have been in previous cycles, I wanted to provide a quick orientation on how to interpret the different variables that you'll see in the model. So each resource name, each variable name has a Resolve resource region, here Tehachapi. It has a technology, solar, and also has a assigned transmission cluster. Here, this would be cluster number 1. The build resources are associated with a build cost, with a resource potential, and with transmission assignments and capabilities. but the build resources do not dispatch to meet load. What happens instead is that all build resources belonging to the same resolve resource region and technology, for example, all of the clusters in Tehachapi Solar, are assigned to a single dispatch variable, Tehachapi Solar, with a corresponding renewable profile via custom constraints in the resolve model. All of the energy storage build resources across all regions, so all of the regions, for example, Tehachapi lithium battery 4-hour 1, are all assigned to a single battery dispatch resource, CAISO lithium battery 4-hour dispatch, to reduce the number of storage variables in the dispatch model. Next slide, please. Some other notes on how resources interact with transmission constraints in resolve. For each candidate solar build resource, we are modeling a corresponding 4-hour and 8-hour lithium-ion battery candidate build resource. The out-of-state resources, for example, Wyoming wind, belong to transmission constraints corresponding to their likely point of tie-in to the existing CAISO transmission system. The constraints for offshore wind resources are included in the CAISO transmission capability model, so those are also accounted for in this representation. And finally, candidate thermal resources and also candidate emerging technologies are not modeled on the transmission network and are excluded from this framework. Finally, another update to the transmission modeling in Resolve. We are now assuming generic transmission upgrades. So the known transmission constraints and available upgrades as reported by the CAISO may be insufficient to permit enough resource additions to meet system needs through the planning horizon. As such, 8 of these quote unquote generic transmission upgrade zones will be modeled to permit additional resource builds once all of the existing and incremental capabilities on the CAISO constraints have been exhausted. To model these constraints, we assume that 500 megawatts per year of incremental capability is made available starting in 2037, and the upgrade costs for these generic upgrades are adapted from large regional 500 kilovolt upgrade costs from the upcoming transmission capability white paper, and are uniformly greater than the costliest CAISO upgrade within each zone. Next slide, please. So now we're going to shift gears slightly. The previous section was talking about transmission modeling within CAISO. We're now going to talk about the transmission topology and resolve, looking at the relationships between the different zones in the model. So this section will discuss the interzonal transmission dispatch limits. Resolve uses a zonal transmission topology to simulate flows among the various regions of the Western interconnection. 6 different zones are modeled. There are 4 zones representing the California balancing authorities, and then 2 zones that represent the regional aggregations of out-of-state balancing authorities. So those zones and their constituent BAs are summarized in the table to the right. In addition to these 6 zones, a 7th zone is modeled to contain all imports of Northwest Hydro. This zone is called CAISO Northwest Hydro. Next slide, please. In this diagram, we have plotted the relationships and flow limits between each of these 7 zones. The transmission flow limits between zones are the sum of flow limits between individual BAAs in the CPUC SURVEM model, which themselves were derived from nodal flow ratings from the WEC 2032 ADS 2.0 dataset. The bidirectional flow values are defined between each zone. Next slide, please. In addition, some discussion on the specified imports of Northwest Hydro. 8.31%, as discussed in section 3.1, of the energy generated by Northwest Hydro is designated as specified imports to CAISO. The resource Northwest Hydro for CAISO has been created to represent those imports, and that resource exists in the CAISO Northwest Hydro Zone. In addition to all imports from Northwest Hydro, any additional unspecified imports or exports between CAISO and the Northwest Zone must pass through this zone first. So it sits between CAISO and the Northwest. A note on emissions accounting: any emissions from unspecified imports from the Northwest are counted towards CAISO's greenhouse gas limit and incur CARB cap and trade emission permit costs. Next slide, please. In addition to the interzonal flow limits, we also model CAISO and California-wide simultaneous flow constraints. The CAISO total imports are limited to 11,041 megawatts, and CAISO total exports are limited to 5,000 megawatts. These limits apply to Resolve's hourly dispatch, but do not apply to the planning reserve margin. For systems reliability accounting, CAISO imports are restricted to 4,000 megawatts. Additionally, in the chart on the right, we are modeling simultaneous import and export limits from California as an aggregated megazone to the Northwest and Southwest. So those constraints are shown in the diagram on the right. Next slide, please. To determine the simultaneous import and export constraint, we reference the CAISO maximum resource adequacy import capability. From that report, we've set the hourly simultaneous import constraint to 11,041 megawatts. But then from this value, we must subtract certain specified imports, namely from Hoover, Sutter, Intermountain Power Plant, and Palo Verde, as well as imports from other firm remote generators, which are contracted to deliver energy to CAISO, but are not modeled in the CAISO zone. So the accounting here is shown on the right. We start with 11,041 megawatts. We subtract the firm capacities from Sutter, IPP, Palo Verde, as well as the firm capacities from CCGT and geothermal imports, and that results in a net import constraint of 8,229 megawatts. Next slide, please. Okay, here we'll turn it over to Angineh.
Thanks, Sam. My name is Angineh Zohrabian. I'm with E3, and I'm gonna give an update on fuel price work with you. Can you please go to the next slide? Yes. As in the past, in Resolve modeling, we rely on CEC's data and wake burner tip price estimates that uses the North America's markets gas trades model runs. We updated our model with March 2023 version, which is IPER 2023 preliminary burner tip prices. And since this is a preliminary data, we will make sure to update with the final release of this data if it comes available before with the timeline of PSP analysis. This data set covers the entire planning horizon, covers from 2023 all the way to 2050. Therefore, we did not do any additional work of extrapolating data for the period of the IRP analysis. For the seasonal price variability, we capture that with monthly multipliers. And this is related to gas prices only. As in the past, the mean demand price forecast for natural gas will be used as our default PSP analysis. Can you please go to the next slide? So here in this chart, you're seeing what the prices look like for the mid versus low and high, although we provide that information in our Resolve model for low and mid, for low and high prices as well, but we will mainly rely on mid scenario, and that additional information might be used for any sensitivities if needed. And as you can see, the new IPER, the 2023 IPER data estimates a slight increase in natural gas prices. The natural gas prices consist of the commodity price and the transport price, and most of these increases are shown are coming from the transport increased cost that was embedded in the assumptions of the preliminary IPER burner tip data set. As well as for California, we use the same data source for Southwest and Northwest, and because we model in result on the specific zones, we use that more granular data in the burner T price to develop our regional gas prices. And as you can see on the right chart, natural gas prices in California are higher than the other Southwest and Northwest prices. And because the other zones don't have that assumption embedded in their delivery cost increase, they look to be very flat. Will you please go to the next slide? In addition to natural gas fuel prices, we also model coal, uranium, and biogas and biomass fuel prices. So for coal and uranium, we relied on 2023 annual energy outlook data and relied on regional data. So we used the Pacific zone and the mountain zone to develop our California, Northwest coal prices and Southwest coal prices. For uranium, we only have one data set, which all of this coal and uranium are the fuel prices delivered to the power sector, and they seem to be very flat through our modeling horizon. The only, the Southwest prices look to be going down over time, as well as California Northwest, and California Northwest tend to have higher coal prices compared to Southwest. For biomass fuel prices, we use a $15 per MMBTU cost, relying on a report from California Energy Department. And for biomass, for biogas, there is limited data availability, but at this moment, we are going to model the same $15 per MMBTU. And this biomass fuel prices will also be applied to the candidate in-state biomass resource that we are including in our list of candidate resources. And to be noted that biomass and biogas fuels may not have, and nuclear, so uranium as well, may not have been much impact on our portfolios because we are modeling them as mass-run resources with not much dispatch and load following capabilities. Could you please go to the next section? In this section, we are going to talk about RPS and SB 100 policies, the way we are incorporating in our result modeling. Next slide. In the past analysis, we modeled the 60% RPS target by 2030, and we are keeping that in our current modeling as well. And in addition to RPS model, we have separated now and modeled an additional SB 100 trajectory. So to be more clear on what is eligible for RPS, the resources include biomass, biogas, wind, solar, geothermal, and small hydro. With SB 1020, we have updated our SB 100 trajectory by adding specific targets of 90% by 2035, 95% by 2040, and then the same 100% by 2045 that we were modeling in the past. In addition to RPS eligible resources for SB 100, large hydro and nuclear are also considered eligible. Retail sales are what the base of these policies are targeting for, and that excludes any of the transmission and distribution energy losses, and as well as behind the meter resources that impact the total system, total retail sales on the system. Could you please go to the next slide? Yes, as you can see in this figure, the green area is what are the renewable energy resources that are the RPS eligible resources and need to meet the RPS target. And the blue part is the additional clean energy generation that needs to be meeting this SB 100 policy targets. Although we don't have any targets before 2035, we have decided to have to model a more smoother compliance period starting from 2031 and making that 2031 target to 2035 years to also be modeled in our PSP analysis to make sure that the compliance for SB 100 is smoother and enough resources are become available by the time these targets are kicking in. And can you go to the next slide, please? And I will pass it to Femi.
My name is Femi from E3, and I'll be walking us through the updates we've made to modeling the GHG trajectory within the CAISO. Next slide. And so the GHG emissions targets through 2035 are unchanged from our previous analyses. We have, however, changed the names to represent the new modeling horizon. What was previously referred to as the 30 million metric tons by 2030 target is now the 25 million metric tons by 2035. And what was previously the 38 million metric tons by 2030 is now the 30 million metric tons by 2035. There are two main changes in the GHG emissions reductions trajectories. The first one being that the 2045 emissions target has now been reduced from the 15 million metric tons statewide target to the 8 million metric tons statewide target to being consistent with the 2022 CARB scoping plan, statewide targets for the power sector. Secondly, the baseline historical emissions for the power sector have been updated using the 59.5 million metric tons in 2020 based on the inventory data from the 2022 California greenhouse gas inventory. And a 82% load share factor was applied to scale that down from the statewide number to what is the CAISO-wide target. In sensitivities, we likely will consider lower targets below 8 million metric tons, but that will depend on how we define those sensitivities. Next slide. And so the chart on the right essentially walks us through what the previous targets were in the dashed lines and what the current targets that we're proposing to analyze in this cycle of the IRP. The 2022 through 2029 GHG emissions in power sector have actually, fallen lower than what we previously modeled because the state has beat those targets. And so what you see here is a slightly lower target than what we were modeling previously. 2030 to 2035, there are no changes in the targets in that year. Between 2036 and 2045, we have used a linear interpolation between the 2035 numbers and the 8 million metric tons by 2045 targets. And even though 2046 to 2050 is outside of our modeling horizon, the emissions are kept level at the 2045 level. And with that, I will pass it back to Ali to introduce the reliability section.
Thank you, Femi. So before we move on to the next section, maybe I ask another time if there is any questions that panelists wants to raise and discuss verbally. So just noting that once we finish the reliability section and at the end of this presentation, we will ask for a few verbal questions using the hand raise function. In terms of the questions that you submitted so far, if you submitted a question and haven't seen the response yet, we are working on those. In the occasion that we are not able to answer during this webinar, we will answer to those questions after the webinar and post the Q&A to our website. So with that, I turn it to Neil to kick off the reliability section.
Thanks, Ali. Good morning, everyone. It's Neil Raffan from the IRP team. Before getting into the content of this reliability section, just highlighting a couple of aims we have here for this section of the webinar. Firstly, we're trying to here really refresh folks and update you on the inputs and the methodology for reliability modeling in IRP using the Resolve and SERVEN models. And we also want to connect this to the broader context of the IRP reliability framework, which also includes the LSC load serving entities IRP filings last year and procurement track work. So I'll be starting out and then handing to colleagues Patrick Young on the modeling team and Josh Spooner and Charlie Gulian from E3 during the course of this. Look, I understand the audience here ranges from generalists to folks who are doing their own modeling of reliability. So I think as a modeling advisory group webinar, we're aiming more at the latter folks, but we will include some introductory material here as well to help those less familiar with the concepts, and so you can follow along. And to the extent you do seek more information, please use the Q&A. And I also point out on the IRP webpage, we do have information, recordings and slides from our webinars last year, which do go into a lot more detail about reliability than we've got time for today. Okay, so then just one emphasis here. Patrick introduced SERVM earlier, and I'll just flag that that's a key tool in a reliability context that we'll be talking about here. We use it in tandem with Resolve. And in this section, we're talking about SERVM providing key inputs to Resolve, particularly the planning reserve margin and the resource counting. We use the effective load carrying capabilities. So SERVM studies are used to determine those inputs, and then Resolve uses them in the optimization. And then SERVM is also used to then test portfolios from LSE plans or Resolve or a combination thereof. SERVM is used to test the reliability of those portfolios. So that's the emphasis on the use of SERVM here. Okay, so then looking at these use cases we've got for reliability modeling during this 22-23 cycle of IRP. Last year, we were focused on the LSE plan filings, and then the use case in focus right now is, of course, the inputs and assumptions for Resolve and SERVM. And then coming up later, we expect to continue building on this approach to reliability in the new programmatic approach to procurement the Commission is planning to adopt, and the reliability need determination for that and IRP broadly. So on the program, I'm tying this back to the staff options paper we released September last year, and the parties' comments on that in December and January on the staff options paper for the reliable and clean power procurement program. Across all these use cases, the approach here is to use consistent methodologies and inputs as far as possible. Next slide, please, David. So looking beyond IRP, just flagging the other use cases for Energy Division's reliability modelling. And we'll probably talk about reliability modelling referring to loss of load modelling or loss of load expectation modelling, using those terms interchangeably. So beyond IRP, the energy resource modelling team, you heard from Patrick Young earlier, that team is using this common SERVM model and the data sets it uses across various other proceedings. So through the Aliso Canyon proceeding to assess the impact of gas supply reliability on electric system reliability, also informing the avoided cost calculator in the integrated distributed energy resource proceeding, and supporting the slice of day framework in the resource adequacy proceeding. And here we're using a common baseline data set across all these use cases. Baseline here in the broad sense of the broad set of inputs needed for loss of load modelling. Using this common data set really helps us maintain quality in our modelling and enables valid comparisons to be made across our modelling work in each venue. There's a link on the slide here to the webpage where the energy resource modelling team posted the data sets used for loss of load modelling from 2022, and we've got the latest data set being posted to a new webpage soon. Next slide, please. So having gone through the various use cases, taking a moment now to emphasize why this is important in the IRP process, it really is critical we plan for a reliable system as we transition towards GHG reductions at least cost. But that's not all about modelling, but modelling is a foundational part of our reliability planning. And so on the left-hand side of this slide, we're really just noting that we've come a long way since the first IRP cycle, and we need to continue to improve our reliability modelling, advance it since that first 2017-18 cycle. In the 2019-21 cycle, we, of course, had two significant reliability procurement orders, not directly tied to loss of load modelling results. and we're seeking to advance that. So in the current cycle, you can see listed here the use cases I just described earlier. The table on the right of this slide is a really good overview of the reliability section of the INA. And so, this section here that we're presenting on right now is section 7 in the inputs and assumption document. The table here also shows other parts of our reliability planning approach outside the scope of today's webinar. So today we're focusing here on the PRM and ELCCs used in Resolve. Next slide, please. More about the approach to reliability modeling this cycle. In summary, we're using the CPUC survey model as the basis for reliability need determination and resource counting. That's the main takeaway. The need determination and LSE plan resource accreditation text on the slide, that's focused on the load serving entity plan filing requirements that we set last year and load serving entities have used in their plans filed in November last year. Today, we're focused on the Resolve updates. In summary, we're proposing moving from Resolve solving for an installed capacity-based planning reserve margin to a perfect capacity-based planning reserve margin, which I'll describe shortly. And then later on, Charlie's going to cover the latest on Resolve's ELCCs. But before that, I'll just hand to Patrick Young from the Energy Resource Modelling team to present the latest updates his team's been working on for survey inputs.
Okay, hello everyone again, Patrick Young here. This is just summarizing the latest SurvM model input updates. So we completed a number of updates in December of last year, and those were first applied to the studies that we did of the base portfolio that went into the CAISO's 23-24 transmission planning process. So if you were following along at that time, the modeling we produced to evaluate the reliability of that portfolio, we included an adjustment to the hourly electric demand profiles based on aligning with the hourly shapes that are found in the CEC's IPR. We found that there was a small misalignment between the 23 weather year, the median of the 23 weather year shapes that we had, and the deterministic 1 hourly shape that the CEC has, particularly in the summer peak hours. So we adjusted our shapes to correct for that and include a bump, if you will, in the summer peak hours of our shapes so that they match better with the hourly shapes that are published with the CEC's IPR. Another change that we made was to model the hydro, to actually disconnect the correlation between hydro years and weather years in our stochastic inputs. So in prior modeling cycles, if we were modeling a 1998 weather year in a particular iteration, we would pair that with a 1998 hydro year, but we found that the correlation is actually pretty weak between the hydro years and the weather years. So we've decided to actually model them independently. So if we have a particular iteration of our model and we choose a 1998 weather year, then we could pair that with 23 different hydro years. So in that sense, we expand the set of stochastic inputs for SurvM 23 times. Another change that we made is to model 7 regions external to California and reflect the imports and exports that would be transferred between California and those regions. If you recall, in Earlier modeling in 2022, we were simulating exchanges outside of California with fixed import shapes, and we've now changed back and we're explicitly modeling external to California regions. In early 2023, we did further modeling updates, and these will, on top of the ones I just discussed, be applied to the rest of the modeling to inform development of the 2023 preferred system plan. So a couple of the updates we did is to update the baseline resources. We did that by drawing data from the CAISO master generating capability list. And currently we are synced up with data that was drawn from January. For baseline and future resources that were included in LSE plans, we've incorporated data from the November filings of LSEs. We've also incorporated information from the January vintage of the net qualifying capacity list. Another update that we did is updating to the 2022 IPR forecast from the Energy Commission. So that includes the electric demand forecasts, the GHG price forecasts, and we also have the draft 2023 NAM gas model from the Energy Commission so that we could update our burner tip fuel prices to the latest information available from the Energy Commission. Back to you, Neil.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, so to wrap up this sort of introduction on the approach and inputs for reliability, as you follow the next few sections and read the inputs and assumption document itself, please consider the resolve reliability updates. And if you have any feedback, please share them by informal comments. Nathan and Ali have laid out the process for that in general. And I'll just flag that regarding reliability, staff expect there to be more opportunity on top of that process, particularly regarding the potential designs for the new procurement program and determining reliability procurement need for mid-decade and beyond. And finally, and this has a brief mention in the INA document, is the low capacity tool that's in progress within Resolve. So that, Resolve's current local reliability functionality is limited. And so the idea here is to expand the optimization by Resolve to consider specific local areas and the possibility of resource additions, retirements, and transmission upgrades at that local level in conjunction with Resolve system level constraints. So more on that later this year. It's not part of the Resolve package right now. Okay, into the next section on PRM and reliability need. There are two buckets of updates we're proposing for Resolve. The second one is concerning how Resolve counts the contribution of resources towards reliability. And Charlie's going to go through that shortly. The first one is updating the total reliability need and its planning reserve margin equivalent that Resolve must solve for, the reserve margin above the 1 and 2 peak load. And we're updating this in a few ways. One is we're proposing switching from the installed capacity accounting basis to perfect capacity accounting, to grounding the analysis to do that on SERVM analysis, whereas past planning reserve margins have not been derived from loss of load modeling for many years. And thirdly, switching the PRM percentage, the planning reserve margin, to be relative to gross peak rather than managed peak. So staff are proposing these updates to better align Resolve and SERVM from a reliability perspective so that that ensures Resolve will better develop sufficiently reliable portfolios. It's helpful to note that no resource is a perfect capacity resource. We've got on the next, where are we up to? Sorry, I can't see which slide we're at, but on the slide with no resource providing perfect capacity, point here is to highlight that no resource is 100% reliable. Even say an oil-fired generator with its on-site fuel storage, that's not completely reliable. And the shades across this slide illustrate the varying degrees of reliability contributions that different resource types could be expected to have. These could vary across electricity systems and years, and depending on a range of other factors. So the oil-fired generator is an example of firm capacity. The use limited resources in the middle of the slide, such as batteries, may have capacity contributions that are a significant percentage of their nameplate capacity, but again, not 100%. And then variable resources, wind and solar, usually have capacity contributions less than their nameplate capacity, with a particular percentage being a function of the resources output and availability and how those correlate with load and as well as the availability and output of other resources in the system. So then looking to the next slide, delving into a perfect capacity planning reserve margin. Before describing this chart, I'll just define at a high level the perfect capacity based approach. What it means is removing from the reserve margin an allowance for forced outages of firm resources, and instead crediting all resource types, including firm resources, at their respective effective load carrying capability, their perfect capacity equivalent. And we would do this based on simulations that consider their risk of outages, their resource availability, and their interaction with load and other resource types. So as per the prior slide, no resource can contribute 100% of its nameplate capacity to resource adequacy. So it's fairer in Resolve's economic optimization to count them using a basis that does consider their perfect capacity equivalence. That's what staff's, that's a key reason for which staff's proposing to switch to the perfect capacity approach in Resolve. The other benefit, and that's what this chart's getting at, is that we expect it will provide a more durable reliability need determination across the planning horizon, because the perfect capacity total reliability need, and therefore the equivalent perfect capacity planning reserve margin, is not dependent on the resource portfolio. It's instead driven by load shapes, load variability, and the need to hold operating reserves. So this would make a portfolio selected by Resolve using perfect capacity to be more likely to have a 0.1 loss of load expectation, the key reliability standard that we are aiming at here. It would make a portfolio more likely to have that set level of reliability when we then go test it back in SERVM than if the portfolio develops in Resolve used an ICAP based approach. So looking at the chart here, firstly, it's illustrative of a particular reliable portfolio. And the x-axis shows how if you change the portion of resources in that portfolio counted at their installed capacity rather than their perfect capacity equivalent, you get a different PRM. It's the same portfolio, but with the wedges indicating what the PRM would turn out to be if you just use installed capacity accounting more so than perfect capacity accounting. And so you can see, looking at the top right of the chart, the perfect capacity PRM is lower than the installed capacity PRM. So it's the same portfolio, the same level of reliability, but the accounting translates to a lower perfect capacity PRM in percentage terms than the installed capacity equivalent. And so again, the reason for the difference is that under the perfect capacity PRM approach, the risk of forced outages of the thermal plant is accounted for in their resource counting, in their perfect capacity equivalent, rather than increasing the reserve margin to allow for the risk of their forced outages. Again, these concepts were explained in a lot of detail in our MAG webinars in particularly July last year, and the slides and recordings are available on our website. So on the final slide in this section, PCAP PRM results, what do we actually propose specifically is used by Resolve for planning reserve margin? this slide shows the results of the loss of load studies we did last year and presented twice. We're proposing a 14% perfect capacity PRM over the gross peak. The chart on the right explains how we arrived at this in a snapshot. And so the x-axis here has two metrics, both illustrating increasing amount of resources in a portfolio going from left to right. Firstly, in perfect capacity gigawatt terms, and then percentage reserve margin translation of that. And the y-axis shows different levels of reliability of the portfolio. So this is indicating for a particular modeled year 2024, the 4 plotted points, the results we got from our survey studies last year, and the line of best fit between those points. And so the arrow points to the level of resources that leads us to a portfolio with a 0.1 loss of load expectation, our target level of reliability. And that's approximately 14% of perfect capacity above the gross peak. So I'm talking about gross peak here. Final concept to convey before I hand over, that when we're putting the planning reserve margin in percentage terms relative to load, we are recommending moving to a gross peak basis. This is consistent with what I was explaining earlier about having all resources counted with their ELCCs. So by gross peak, I'm referring to you take the managed peak and then add back the production we expect from behind the meter PV to get to the gross peak. And then counting that behind the meter PV at its ELCC as a supply side resource. So consistent with what I was saying earlier, we think this would give the PRM durability over time, because as the installation of behind the meter PV grows, the gross peak will remain relatively stable, whilst the managed peak will change more quickly. So that's another that also aids the durability of the PRM, in addition to the reason I explained earlier about the shifting from ICAP to PCAP. So this is the PRM we propose to use in resolve modeling for IRP this year. And now I'll hand to Josh, who's going to explain how we're going to factor in the midterm reliability procurement orders in resolve and how they relate to the PRM.
Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Spooner from E3, and as Neil mentioned, I'm going to discuss implementing the midterm reliability orders that the CPUC recently gave, which we need to consider in addition to the reserve margin. So the two orders given in 2021 and 2023 ordered the NCAISO LSEs to procure 15.5 gigawatts of net qualifying capacity, or NQC, from 2023 to 2028. And in Resolve, we model this as a constraint that the model needs to meet. The constraint is doing two things. Firstly, it's simply ensuring that Resolve builds enough resources. So this is similar to how Resolve sees the planning reserve margin Neil just discussed. It needs to build sufficient resources to meet that. However, in some years, the procurement that was ordered for midterm reliability may exceed that reserve margin. So, for example, hypothetically, if Resolve would need to build 14 gigawatts to meet that reserve margin in 2028, this MTR constraint would require Resolve to keep building on top of that and reach the 15.5 gigawatts that was ordered. The second thing this constraint is doing is making sure Resolve builds the right resources to meet this order, because every single resource that makes up this 15.5 gigawatts needs to be zero emissions. And on top of that, 1 gigawatts each needs to be geothermal or a long duration greater than 8-hour storage resource. Next slide, please. And to determine the NQC, how these resources count towards the 15.5 gigawatts of NQC, for wind, solar, and storage, the order requires us to use the MTR ELCC study that concluded earlier this year. And these ELCCs, which we can see on the table here, are showing the perfect capacity contribution of all of these resources. And these ELCCs change year by year. So we see tranche 1 in the leftmost column for 2023, tranche 6 in the rightmost for 2028. And I'll briefly note that the megawatt numbers in each of those column headers represents the total procurement we need in each year's, and that can be made up with any mix of zero emission resources. And for an example of how this works, if we were to build 100 megawatts nameplate capacity of a 4-hour battery, in 2028, we'd go to that top right ELCC of 76%, multiply it by the nameplate, and we get 76 megawatts of NQC, and that will count towards that 2,000 megawatts. It is important to note that these wind solar storage ELCCs we see on this table are specific to the MTR constraint in Resolve. For non-MTR decisions in Resolve, we will have a separate ELCC surface or ELCC curves that my colleague Charles Gulian will discuss shortly. For biomass and geothermal, we are going to use the same NQC values that we use for non-MTR decisions in Resolve. And with that, I will pass it off to Charles Gulian.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Gulian. I'm with E3, and I'll be discussing our ELCC inputs to Resolve and our approach to modeling ELCC. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we will be going over some of the updates to wind, solar, and long-duration storage ELCCs. Since the September webinar, we have recalculated most of these ELCCs in Survem, and these updates basically reflect some of the updates to the inputs that were discussed on previous slides, such as the updated load shape and new out-of-state wind profiles, as well as updates to the starting portfolio for the solar and storage surface. Next slide, please. So as a brief reminder for some context here, Resolve attempts to build a reliable portfolio that satisfies the PCAP PRM that Josh and Neil had just discussed. However, typically some iteration is required between Resolve, which is a linear programming-based capacity expansion model, and a more detailed loss of load probability simulation model like Survem. And while it's not feasible to embed a detailed loss of load probability simulation model within Resolve that will accurately be able to capture the reliability of every portfolio, we do use ELCCs to measure the reliability contribution of different resources, and that is the basis for Resolve's reliability module. Next slide, please. So we use ELCC to measure the reliability contributions of a diverse class of resources, including variable resources such as solar and wind, and energy limited resources such as storage and demand response. And ELCCs are capable of capturing the complex interactive effects between these resources and their contributions to portfolio reliability. Next slide, please. So here we present an overview of our approach to modeling all resource ELCCs in Resolve. The column on the right is showing our updated set of approaches for this round of the IRP. The top row signifying the switch from an ICAP-based PRM to a PCAP PRM, which Neil just discussed. And on the resource side of things, we have wind, 3 classes of wind resources: in-state, out-of-state, and offshore wind, which are modeled on 3 separate ELCC curves. We model solar, both behind the meter and utility scale solar, together on a surface with 4-hour storage. And it's important that these resources are modeled together and their ELCCs are modeled together to capture the large synergistic benefits of building these resources in tandem. So those are modeled together on a 2-dimensional solar and storage surface. We also model other types of energy limited resources on the storage dimension of this 2D surface, and that includes demand response, such as load shedding, demand response, as well as longer durations of storage, including pump storage. And then for other classes of resources like hydro, biomass and biogas, geothermal, nuclear, and fossil fuel-based resources, These are given static ELCCs, which effectively capture the reliability contribution of those classes of resources towards the PRM. Finally, behind the meter storage is modeled as a load modifier in Resolve, and it doesn't explicitly have an ELCC counted towards the PCAP PRM. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm actually going to skip the next few slides, which are, so you could skip 2 ahead from here. These are more just introductory on our approach to ELCC. This was discussed in the September webinar. So for the sake of time, sorry, one more slide. For the sake of time, I will just jump into our results here. So here we're showing our final wind ELCCs that were calculated in SERVM, again, reflecting the updates to the inputs that have been discussed in previous sections. While these results have changed slightly, the relative ordering of offshore to out-of-state to in-state wind resources is consistent. Generally, we see that the ELCC of wind resources is commensurate with their capacity factor, and hence we have this relative ordering where offshore wind has the highest ELCC, followed by out-of-state wind resources, which here are representing New Mexico and Wyoming, and in-state wind resources in the CAISO. Next slide, please. So now we will look at our 2-dimensional solar and storage surface results. Again, these are similar to the ELCC curves that we were just looking at for wind, but here we're adding a dimension so we could look at combined portfolios of solar and battery penetrations. Next slide, please. So these tables are showing the results that we calculated since September in SERVM. These are showing for different combined penetrations of solar going across the table from left to right, and 4-hour battery storage going down the tables from top to bottom. These are showing the marginal ELCC of each resource for different combinations of penetration. So marginal battery ELCC is shown in the table on the left, marginal solar ELCC in the table on the right. What you'll notice is that on the table on the left, as you go down any one of these columns and increase 4-hour battery nameplate capacity relative to a fixed solar nameplate capacity, the marginal ELCC declines because the reliability value of storage saturates. However, as you go across the table, fixing a row or a given level of nameplate storage penetration and increased solar penetration, the marginal ELCC of storage increases again, reflecting the strong synergistic interactions between additions of solar and 4-hour storage capacity. And the story is similar in the table on the right showing solar marginal ELCC, where as we go across the rows indicating additional solar nameplate megawatts, the marginal ELCC of solar declines, but as we add more storage going down the columns for a fixed solar nameplate capacity, we see that the solar marginal ELCC also increases. And this highlights why it's important to capture the ELCC of these resources together on a single surface in Resolve, so that we fully, so that we're confident that the model is fully understanding the combined reliability contributions and the complex interactive effects between these resources. Next slide, please. This is just an illustrative visual of the full solar and storage surface that Resolve actually sees. And here we're showing that as Resolve invests in resources starting in a particular model year, such as 2026, and adds additional solar and 4-hour storage capacity before the next model year, 2030, for example, this surface captures the full set of possible reliability contributions of various additions of solar and storage nameplate. Next slide, please. So there are other resources that we have modeled on the solar and storage surface. That includes shed demand response, which is in many ways similar or similarities to 4-hour storage, mainly in the way that it is dispatch limited or energy limited. And so for candidate shed DR resources, we modeled additions of those resources as effectively additions of 4-hour storage on the solar and storage surface. Whereas for existing shed DR resources, we calculated a single static ELCC of 96%, which will apply for those resources in all years. While shed DR is similar to 4-hour storage, it's not identical, and it's important to capture the differences between those two resources when modeling it on the solar and storage surface. And so for each model year, we tried to capture this with a multiplier for the equivalent 4-hour battery nameplate capacity of shed DR. The way this was calculated is by adding additions of 4-hour storage in SERVM and equivalent additions of shed DR in SERVM, and comparing the incremental ELCC or reliability benefit of each addition to get effectively an exchange rate of shed DR to 4-hour battery nameplate capacity in terms of its reliability value. And this is shown in the chart here on the right. And as you can see, the multipliers in each year are below 100%, indicating that shed DR is relatively less valuable from a reliability standpoint than 4-hour storage. Next slide, please. And we took a similar approach to modeling longer durations of storage resources in Resolve. The idea here is similar in that, again, longer durations of storage resources, 8 hours and above. So in this table on the top right, the example here is 8-hour battery storage. The idea is that these resources are similar as well to 4-hour storage and hence can be modeled on the same surface, but we would like to capture the additional reliability value provided by the larger energy storage capability of these resources. And this table is pulling results from previous work that we published with the CPUC from the 2022 LSE filing requirement marginal ELCC study. And what we notice is initially in early years, the marginal ELCC of 4-hour and 8-hour batteries is the same, meaning that they provide similar reliability contributions. But over time, as implicitly more and more 4-hour storage is built on the CAISO system, the marginal ELCC of 4-hour batteries begins to decline, whereas the marginal ELCC of longer durations, such as 8 hours, doesn't decline by as much and is still more valuable comparatively than 4-hour storage. And in fact, in 2035, as we highlight here, it's almost providing twice the marginal reliability benefit to 4-hour storage. So on the next slide, we show these are similar to what we showed for DR. These are effectively exchange rates between various longer duration storage resources and their equivalent 4-hour battery capacity. We're showing this instead of by model year as a function of the underlying 4-hour battery penetration. And again, these results are calculated based on pairs of SERVM runs, where we add an increment of 4-hour battery and then an increment of these various long duration storage resources and compare the marginal reliability benefit. So here we're showing this with respect to total 4-hour battery penetration on the system. And again, initially, all durations for low penetrations of 4-hour batteries, initially all durations provide a similar reliability benefit, But over time, as the 4-hour battery ELCC begins to decline, these resources provide a larger and more stable reliability benefit that is proportional to their duration, which is, again, what we expect. So we modeled 4 different durations and 4 technologies of 8 hours representing lithium-ion batteries with 85% round-trip efficiency, 12-hour pumped hydro storage, 24-hour compressed air energy storage, and 100-hour iron-air battery storage with 45% round-trip efficiency. Next slide, please. These were just based on a survey that we've conducted of the space of storage technologies and are basically representing realistic combinations of duration and round-trip efficiency within the model. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I think there's 2 animations here. If you could continue. Next slide. Okay, for hydro ELCC, the approach was a bit simpler. For these resources, we calculated a static ELCC for the large and the small hydro resources within the CAISO. And within Resolve, these are represented as a single aggregated resource with a 58% ELCC. Next slide. And finally, for firm resources, again, consistent with our PCAP PRM, these resources were also modeled with ELCCs. In the past, I think we've looked at this from a UCAP standpoint, where effectively in this middle column, effectively the nameplate capacity is derated by the expected forced outage rate of the resource. However, ELCCs are effectively capture the reliability impact of forced outages, which can have an asymmetric impact on system reliability when multiple forced outages happen coincidentally or simultaneously. So that is why most of these ELCCs are slightly lower than the implied UCAP value in the middle column. So those first 5 rows are for combined cycle, combustion turbines, reciprocating engines, steam, and nuclear. And the last 3 rows represent firm resources with additional operational constraints, such as combined heat and power, biomass and biogas resources, and geothermal. For these resources, their ELCC was modeled as being equivalent to their NQC, again, to capture the additional constraints on their operations. So that takes us through all of our ELCC, our approach to modeling ELCC in Resolve. And I'll now hand it off to my colleague, Angineh.
So switching gears towards load updates here, can we go to the next slide? As in the past, in our Resolve modeling, we are using load scenarios and load data inputs from CEC IPER Integrated Energy Policy Report. This round, we updated our load models for CAISO and non-CAISO California loads based on 2022 IPER data. The forecasted data is adapted to 2035, but some of the load modifier categories had additional data available through 2050, which we use to complement our load data inputs. While mostly our PSP modeling will rely on 2022 IPER planning scenario, other scenarios might be used with higher electrification intentions to be used as sensitivities in PSP modeling. In addition to load, we also updated behind the meter generation data and capacity based on 2022 IPER forecasts. Gross system peak is also calculated using the 2022 IPER hourly data. Northwest and Southwest zones are also updated, and they are showing a little bit of a considerable load growth, as you can see in the chart. Can we go to the next slide? So in this table on the right, you're seeing the breakdown of the load categories that we are modeling with the 2022 IPER planning scenario and how those data are incorporated in the time frame of our PSP modeling. So for baseline demand, we use the 2022 IPER to 2035 because that's the whole period that we have the data available. And we complemented the additional years, the 2035 through 2050, using the 2021 AT data that covered that longer period.
Technically, no.
In transportation, we modeled the full data coming from IPER 2022 for 2035, and that additional data that I mentioned became available for transportation electrification loads. Similarly, for energy efficiency and building electrification, we rely on this data that became available through 2050. Time of use impacts, we used the 2023 to 2035 from IPER planning, and we kept that flat beyond 2035. For behind-the-meter PV and behind-the-meter batteries, we used 2022 IPER that covered through 2035, and then we linearly extrapolated the energy through later years. And as you can see in the chart comparison of 2022 IPER planning scenario with 2021 IPER mid and 2021 IPER AT, you can see IPER planning is somewhere in between the two scenarios, and it's very close to the models, the scenarios that was modeled for 2023 and 2024 TPP in earlier years. And then it stays, relatively moderated between the two load scenarios that were modeled for 2022 LSE filings, that is the IPER mid, and the AT that was modeled for 2023, 2024 TPP. Can we go to the next slide, please? So behind-the-meter resources, including behind-the-meter PV and storage, are shown here. As you can see, the capacity of these resources are showing a large adoption rates for behind-the-meter PV as well as behind-the-meter storage. And those are basically updated data for using 2022 IPER forecast. And as I mentioned before, for later years, 2036 to 50, we linearly extrapolated that out. It is noticeable that in 2022 IPER, we only received one single forecast for behind-the-meter PV adoption, which we will use this cycle for PSP analysis, but for some of the sensitivities, we may rely on lower or higher adoption rates, likely from 2021 IPER forecast. Can we go to the next slide, please? For gross system peak, we relied on hourly data that came from 2022 IPER planning scenario. And as you can see in this figure, the gross CAISO load was calculated as managed net load in the hourly IPER data and subtracted out or added back mostly the behind-the-meter PV generation to get the CAISO gross load. And that hourly data was used to find the maximum of hour of load in each year, and that's what you are seeing in this chart. And as you can see in the chart, the dash lines for showing the 2021 IPER mid, the green dash line, and 2022 IPER planning is in between the IPER mid and yellow dash line, which shows 2021 IPER ATE. And it still shows a significant growth in gross system peak, but it's much moderate than what was assumed or used in the 2021 AT scenario. Behind-the-meter PV is modeled on the supply side with appropriate ELCC, as my colleagues mentioned earlier on this call, and behind-the-meter storage is treated as a load modifier in gross peak calculation. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, here we are showing the updated information on non-CAISO load forecast and using for non-CAISO California load forecast zones, we're using 2022 IPER form 1.5A, and it's showing relatively moderate load growth compared to Northwest and Southwest, which we relied on 2032 wake anchor data set and extrapolated for future years. Can you go to the next slide, please? I think that covers all, and back to you, Ali.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next steps, maybe pause here and see if there is any questions that any of the panelists want to raise verbally. If not, we have a few minutes. Maybe we ask all the attendees if there is any questions that you want to ask. Raise your hand. We can spend a few minutes on those. Doug, you're unmuted.
Doug Carpenter from Peninsula Clean Energy. Yeah, I just had a question in the chat that I don't think got addressed, but I sort of stepping back a little more big picture. Like I understand why you all are sticking with the ELCC methodology, but I'm wondering if there are any plans or thoughts on how to eventually transition to a 24-hour methodology, simply because, I mean, that's where a lot of the analysis and tracking is going. And also, of course, the RA program is being done in those terms.
Hey, Doug, it's Neil here. I'm just partway through responding to you. But firstly, ELCC studies do consider the reliability contribution of resources across all hours. And I think the short answer is no, we haven't considered adding slice of day compliance as a reporting, like an additional reporting out of the resolve model. I think, it's something we haven't discussed it as a team, but personally thinking we would want to see the compliance rules matured further. And also just note that slice of day is an LSE by LSE compliance framework, and just to think through the relevance of applying that in system level modeling that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Neil. Next, Helen.
Workshop. I appreciate it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I also had a question that I just recently posed that hasn't been answered in the chat. And it struck me listening to the conversation about ELCCs for storage and the differences between 4-hour and 8-hour storage. I personally haven't been able to sort out in Resolve whether Resolve actually selects 4-hour versus 8-hour storage. It seems to instead sort of select a generic 1-hour storage asset that then it stacks up in some way based on how it's optimized by Resolve. I wondered, since we have such a fantastic team on the panel, if somebody can explain that a little bit better and how that then correlates with the discussion about ELCC shapes for the different durations of storage.
This is Femi from E3. I can speak to the storage duration question. So previously, Resolve was allowed to optimize for capacity and energy as independent variables in selecting storage resources. Duration was essentially an implied function of that optimization. But in this round, we're actually moving to fixed duration battery storage resources. And so we're actually providing the model with 2 options for battery storage resources, a 4-hour battery storage resource and an 8-hour battery storage resource to essentially reflect more of what we're seeing in development in the real world. And so that's why the ELCC surface is only considering those 2 kinds of battery storage resources. Does that answer your question, Ellen?
Ellen might be back on mute. Ellen, if there's a part of your question that we didn't get to, can you just make sure that it's in the Q&A in writing, and we will get to it, and it'll be in the transcript?
Sure, thanks. I just got unmuted again, by the way, so I'll ask it. I think I know the answer, but I saw that you put out some new files for resource costs along with the posting of all these materials. Then are those characteristics for the 4-hour and 8-hour batteries in those files we can find?
When you say characteristics, what do you mean? The cost characteristics?
For example, yes, that's what I had in mind.
Yes, it is
Okay.
in there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So let's do one more question and then we go through the next steps and closing remarks. Andrew, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Just there was one quick note. I saw that the hydro ELCC numbers went by kind of fast, but I think it was something like 58%, and it just seemed a little low. And I guess in general, it just seems like hydro really is going to vary from year to year based on the hydro year. And curious to understand how you developed that number and whether or not any sort of like hydro variation from year to year was factored into that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, so those were calculated in SurvM as static ELCCs, and I actually think Patrick Young discussed one of the updates that was made in this round of SurvM modeling as it pertains to different hydro years and how they correlate with weather and load in each year. I think in this iteration, we assumed that these hydro years were independent of load and weather years, and thus could sort of be model different combinations independently in each weather year. And Patrick, if you have anything to add to that, please do.
Thanks, Joe. With that, thanks, Patrick. With that, let's move on to the next steps and closing remarks. Turning to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Ali. To be honest, I wasn't certain we would actually get through those 3 hours as quickly as we did. We're a little bit ahead of time. This is going to be familiar from the beginning of the presentation, but we just want to go over next steps again. So first, we're inviting informal comments by 2 weeks from now, June 21st, 2023. Second, we're asking that you submit your comments to the usual IRP data request address. It's right here, using 2023 INA in the subject line for ease of sorting on our side. Stakeholders are obviously encouraged to include the IRP service list as well. And we ask that you please categorize your comments based on section numbers and topics from the INA doc itself for ease of understanding and processing on our side. And I can't emphasize this enough. And it doesn't just apply here, it applies to any time you're submitting comments with an IRP. The easier you can make it for staff to sort, the more seriously we're able to consider whatever feedback you're giving us. So please think of that when submitting. Next, please support your input, whatever you provide in your informal comments with data or explanations wherever possible. If you're referring to specific info, please provide links to it and citations so that we can trace the path, so to speak. Staff will be reviewing and considering all of your input before we finalize the INA, which we're expected to do in Q3. The information covered today in terms of slides is already up on the website. A recording and the Q&A transcript will be posted alongside of it. We will probably keep this open to finalize the Q&A to the extent that a couple of you might still have questions in the Q&A bar that are unanswered. We're going to seek to answer them in the next few minutes before closing this WebEx so that they can all be part of the bundle that we post on the website. So you are feel free to adjourn from the meeting. If your question is in there and it hasn't been answered, we will answer it and we will post it with the rest of the Q&A that goes on the site soon. But otherwise, we just want to thank you for spending time with us, for your patience since last fall, when we had set an expectation that this document would be ready in wintertime. It's obviously approaching summer. There were quite a few things happening in the IRP proceeding, as well as some data sources and other things that we had to wait on in order to finalize this. But thank you for continuing to take part in the process. And thank you in advance for all the thoughtful comments that we know we're going to get in a few weeks' time. This info underpinned the analysis that we hold very dearly in IRP, and we really appreciate your participation in making all of this the best that it can be. I think with that, we can close, Ali.
Thank you. Yes. I think David, we can pause. We can stop recording. And I'm downloading the questions.
I would hold off on downloading the questions until we're certain they're all answered.
Okay.
I'm still going on 1 or 2.